Hi folks, how you doing? Hope you're well. Over the last couple of weeks, I've had a bunch of people ask me the same question over and over again, so I thought I'd shoot a quick video about it. And they're asking me, what resources do I use to stay up to date with the war in Ukraine? Now, there's a couple of them, and there's a few go-tos that I have. So the first one is the Deep State Live map. So it's just deepstatemap.live. So you'll see Deep State, well kind of known, built a pretty good brand in the last year for all the wrong reasons. But what they do is they give you the disposition of the Russian forces and they show you exactly where the front lines are. It's not in real time, of course, but it's usually pretty accurate, and you can use that to cross-reference against what's going on the front lines and what you're seeing in Telegram. So Telegram is the other tool that I use, and unfortunately I can't scroll through Telegram here because it'll be outside the scope of what you can and can't show on YouTube. So I'll scroll down the sidebar here, and you can pause the video if you want to have a look at some of the channels that I'm following, and I recommend that you follow lots of these channels. So I'm using mainstream media to understand where the narrative is and to understand where the narrative is pointing. And then I'm using Telegram as an open source intelligence tool to see if I'm getting something similar there as well. And 10 times out of 10, one of these things is not like the other. And that's because the mainstream narrative wants you to believe and hear a certain thing, but what's actually going on the ground is usually a completely different kettle of fish. Unfortunately, folks, I can't scroll through these channels or click through these channels because a lot of the content is outside the scope of YouTube, and I don't want to show you that content, particularly if you've not seen real-time war footage before, because it's pretty unpleasant. I've been around this for a long time, since I was 17 years old when I first joined the military, so I've been exposed to all sorts of things, and I'm pretty desensitized to it. The same way, I guess, a police officer would be desensitized to a crime scene, but that is still that's still shocking content in here, and I'm still shocked by what I see on a daily basis. I've got all sorts of channels in here. They're personal ones. There's some government stuff in there as well. So I try to be careful of the government stuff because you want to be careful that the mainstream propaganda is not actually being pulled in to Telegram here when I've got something completely different. This person is an individual, he's an individual, and they must know soldiers on the front line, and that's how they're pulling in the content that they're actually getting. So you've really got to try and delineate with your open source intelligence what is real, what the government are telling you, versus what you're actually seeing there on the front lines. And down through this sidebar and all the channels that I'm following, most of it's Ukrainian, of course. Some of it is Russian and some of it is from Wagner as well. So it's important that you're seeing all sides of the argument, you're seeing all sides of the conflict. And whenever I'm looking at the content inside of Telegram here, on a daily basis, I'm seeing things that are outside the scope of armed conflict. So even here we are on the Australian Red Cross website, even in times of war, there are laws. So there's laws that govern armed conflict, and they're called the laws of armed conflict. And so these laws, as a soldier, an airman, as a sailor, whoever you are serving in the military, these underpin how you're supposed to behave on a battlefield. You do, of course, get rules of engagement when you go on an operation, and you'll be briefed in detail what those rules of engagement are. But outside of and on top of those rules of engagement, you must comply with these things here. So I'm not going to read all of these things independently here for you. What I'll do is I'll put the link in the description below, and you can watch this video here in real time, and you can just skim over the top of it here. So one of the biggest ones here that I will read to you is that you're specifically not allowed to target medical workers. Medical workers, medical vehicles, and hospitals dedicated to humanitarian work cannot be attacked. But on a daily basis, I see both sides, both on the Ukrainian side and the Russian side, engaging with people that are out of the fight. And if you pause the videos, you'll see these people are laying face down in a ditch, no weapon systems anywhere near them to be seen. They're not lying on them either. They're definitely not lying on their rifle. And they're being engaged by drones from above. Okay, let me just grab this folder that I've got here that I've called War Crimes. And what I've got here is, as I look through Telegram, I'm seeing on a daily basis atrocities being conducted by both sides, by the Russians and the Ukrainians. And what I'm seeing is that it's outside the scope of the laws of armed conflict here. And you can see it pretty clearly. Sometimes there's Russians here, and I'll just make it a little bit bigger so you can see some of the titles. Russians firing on civilian medical relief vehicles. So there was clearly red crosses on this vehicle, but they fired an anti-tank missile or an anti-armor missile of some sort to here, and they killed a whole bunch of people there. You might have seen that video going around in mainstream media, but they're targeting medical personnel, which is actually a war crime. So most of the video content that I've got here is related to drones engaging with soldiers that are out of the fight. This one here I collected today was the Russians firing white phosphorus artillery rounds in Kherson. And if you don't know what white phosphorus is, it's exactly what it sounds like, but it's a chemical, but it burns so hot, it burns white hot, and it burns through concrete. And the Russians are clearly using incendiary devices as anti-personnel weapon systems, which is outside the Geneva Convention. You're not allowed to use white phosphorus against personnel, and that's actually what they're doing. So the footage shows that, and you might have seen that a few times, that the Russians are using white phosphorus against Ukrainian troops, and they're using it against Ukrainian troops in the open as well. So you can see that happening, and clearly they're not doing it against buildings or infrastructure or vehicles or something like that. They're using it against troops in the open. So a lot of the video content here, and I can't press play on any of these videos, folks, because they are horrific. Some of them are absolutely horrific. There's one here of a Ukrainian who captures several Russian troops. They're laying face down in a ditch. So they're face down with their hands on their head, and they're arguing, and you can hear the Ukrainian guy screaming and shouting, and you hear the Russian guy say something back to him, and then he shoots the Russian guy on the ground 7 times in the head with his AK. And it's right there on camera, on footage. So he's murdered on the battlefield. It's a war crime. The guy no longer poses a threat. His weapons have been taken away from him. He can be as much of a smartass as he wants to. It doesn't excuse an execution on the battlefield. Now, I'm not there, folks. I'm just an armchair critic sitting 50,000 miles away on the other side of planet Earth. But what I am saying to you is that if you're cheering on the Ukrainians, just watch out, because you're cheering on the death of Russians. And if you're cheering on the Russians, you're cheering on the death of Ukrainians. And cheering on the death of anyone is what this is. That's why this is a complete and total failure of humanity, folks. War is a failure of humanity. And the war crimes that are being committed on a daily basis that I'm looking at in Telegram here on a daily basis, I'm telling you, that's a complete and total failure of humanity. And as I scroll up, I can see here, just, there's not that many channels in the scheme of things, right? It kind of stops there, like 3 or 4 scrolls of my mouse wheels. A little bit more keeps going, but it pretty much stops around there. So all of this content here, most of it's individuals, but some of it is government related. So my question to the Ukrainian government and to the Russian government and to the people that are in charge of Wagner, you're also on Telegram. You're also seeing these war crimes being perpetrated. You're seeing these things happen, but you're not doing anything about it. The next question that I have is for the people in mainstream media. I'm certain that journalists that are out there in mainstream media are looking at these Telegram channels. If I was a journalist, I'd be looking at these channels because I want to stay up to date and be reporting accurately on what's going on. But I don't hear a single peep out of anybody talking about this murder and this execution that happened on the battlefield. I don't see anyone talking about Ukrainian soldiers targeting immobile troops on the battlefield. And they're also targeting medical parties on the battlefield, which is outside the laws of armed conflict. I don't hear anybody talking about it. So I just wanted to take a minute here, ladies and gentlemen, to shine a light on this, because I think that's a really important subject to know about, and I think it's really important to understand what the laws of armed conflict are and what you can and can't do, because it really governs your behavior on the battlefield. And what I'm seeing is the descent into depravity, and war is depravity, and war is the worst of human nature. It's unfortunate, and it doesn't belong in the 21st century, yet here we are seeing it all again, and we're seeing not history rhyme, we're seeing history repeat itself. And these people perpetrating these crimes at some point in time need to be held to account. So if you're looking at this in Telegram like I am and you're seeing these war crimes, I suggest you create a little folder for yourself, download these videos, back them up, because at some point in the future, these people will need to be held to account.